62 million eyes stopped scrolling. A hush swept over living rooms coast to coast. Melanian froze on camera, her expression locked like a statue as Jasmine Crockett tore into the truth with a pair of receipts that burned through denials and lies. What happens when a single congresswoman peers into the machinery of power, holds up evidence with the weight of justice, and sees the world stop? That's what unfolded, live raw, unfiltered, unignorable, and the impact rippled beyond. Sound bites into the very heart of American politics. The moment crackled with intention. Not staged, not sensational, just fierce truth laid bare, and watching it was like catching fire in real time. Crockett, known for unwavering tenacity, didn't raise her voice so much as sharpen it with facts. She held documents, policies misrepresented, oversight reports twisted, a chain of claims unraveling under the glare of accountability. And Melanian, tethered to a legacy of image and silence, was caught undone. Freeze frame, unscripted reaction. It wasn't about drama. It was a seismic rupture in political theater. The question rings, what do you do when someone exposes your empire of spin with cold, undeniable proof? And who pays attention when the high stage crumbles? No backing away. Now, the camera stayed live as Crockett methodically laid out the receipts, memos, internal emails, public statements replayed and reframed. Each point landed harder than the last, misstatements refuted, timelines corrected, reputations tested. She wasn't angry. She was precise, relentless. This was not performance. It was confrontation with consequences. And the country felt it. Lawmakers watched, pundits leaned forward. Everyday people leaned into their screens because this wasn't kabuki. Real world, real stakes, trust shattered. Accountability demanded. Crockett's rise didn't happen by chance. This is the woman who walked corridors of law and legislature determined to fuse lived experience with policy. A black congresswoman representing Dallas, she had already weathered redistricting storms, voter suppression fights, campus protests, and culture wars. But this moment transcended all. She held the receipts in one hand, poised over one of the most watched political stages in the country, and asked a simple question: are you telling the truth? Because if you are, I welcome transparency. But if not, the pause midair dared everyone to choose. Was this reckoning or revolt? And Melanian, once the unflappable figure of prestige and poise, stood miniaturized by contrast. Not because she crumbled, but because the statement cut so deeply that even the straightest lines of composure wobbled. And in that second, unrehearsed people leaned in. That still image made headlines. Hashtag Frozen Melanian jumped across platforms. When truth meets gloss, one commentator wrote, the real cracks show. It wasn't about scoring viral points. It was about disruption. A reminder that power can be undone with data, corrected timelines, and unblinking moral clarity. Politics rarely delivers such cinematic clarity, but in that moment, Crockett gave it to us. She wasn't posturing, she was revealing. She was insisting accountability mattered more than optics. From there, the fallout was kinetic. Social media exploded. Legal analysts traced each receipt. Media outlets transitioned from reactive soundbites to layered dissections. What memos did she reveal? Which policies had been mischaracterized? Who had signed off? The halls of Washington buzzed. Staffers hustled to tidy up records. Press secretaries raced to issue clarifications. But the footage had been broadcast public, undeniable, irreversible. Meanwhile, in living rooms and local halls, grassroots organizers leaned in. This is our moment, said a voting rights advocate in Detroit. Proof works. People started demanding transparency in state houses, city councils, campuses. The snippet became a catalyst. If one congresswoman could do this on national TV, what could a community do in a press conference? A city board meeting? A school board hearing? The bar had shifted. Crockett's strategy wasn't theatrics. It was accountability grounded in substance. Years earlier, she'd campaigned on transparency and redistricting, on federal ethics reform. She wasn't flippant about optics. She believed optics were consequences of integrity. Her office released a primer on how to interpret the documents, how to ask for public records, how to hold elected officials accountable. See the receipts, the headline read. And the public did. They clicked. They read. They tracked chains of custody. They asked their own reps for their receipts, pressure mounted. Critics dismissed it as gotcha politics, claiming she was grandstanding. But that didn't stick. Because receipts are receipts. The line between truth and lies was drawn not with rhetoric, but with record. People noticed. Even her opponents noticed that their talking points now rang hollow. Internal polling within her district showed a spike in approval. In Texas town halls, moderators repeated variants like, "Can you show us the documentation?" It became ACATCHPHRASE. The national level. Democrats seized on it as a teachable moment. They hosted forums on transparency, on demystifying how policy is made, how statements are verified. They invited Crockett as a speaker, not because they needed another face, but because she had shown how one moment of truth can change the narrative. And she leaned into it not basking, but redirecting. Empower other people to say, "Show me," she told one panel. Don't let them hide behind talking points. Ask to see the receipts. But above all, what made the moment so electrifying was its realness. No one had alerted her that Melanian would react that way. No script warned the crew to keep filming after that freeze. It was raw. It was messy. It felt urgent because it was. And in politics, moments like that don't come around often. When they do, you don't look away, the clip continues to circulate. Campaigns across the country use it as a cautionary tale. Words matter, evidence matters, and when you're pinned. By transparency, the flashbulbs expose more than just lies, they expose character. Media studies professors use it in ethics classes. Young politicians reference it as their "what I learned from Jasmine Crockett case." It has weight. Not because it was viral, because it was consequential. Still, for all the online buzz, the story continues in quiet places, district offices, local clinics, neighborhood events. Crockett remains present. She visits community health centers, attends church meetings, supports local candidates. People still ask, "Will you bring the receipts?" And yes, she will. Because the message is clear, no more polished PR shields. Democracy is messy because humans are. Accountability requires records, reminders, demands for clarity. Meanwhile, in official corridors, you can sense unease. Legal teams recheck statements. PR teams vet scripts harder. District attorneys triple-check timelines. Because the bar was reset. Show us the documentation or expect the freeze. And so the nation watches not because of celebrity, but because of principle. It's a reminder that every layer of power rests on truth or its absence. And when someone stands up and says, "Here is the proof," the ripple can't be contained by spin, by position, or by privilege. Melanian remained still under the glare that day. But the nation awakened. And the story was only beginning to unfold. 62 million screens did not blink, because once a nation sees receipts, it cannot unsee them. The aftermath of Jasmine Crockett's confrontation on live television was not silence, it was uproar. Rumble, the slow drumbeat of a political earthquake. Melanian's stillness became the frozen image replayed endlessly, a silent echo of power caught off guard. But what matters more is what came after. The hearings, the analysis, the mobilization, the way citizens themselves picked up the word receipts and weaponized it against spin in every arena of public life. In Texas, Crockett returned home, to find herself embraced not as a politician basking in viral fame, but as a vessel for accountability. At community centers, people raised their phones, playing back the clip. At churches, pastors replayed the moment before congregations, drawing parallels to the biblical demand for truth, for light to pierce through darkness. At college campuses, students debated what it meant for democracy when receipts, real evidence, mattered more than polished sound bites. Crockett listened, nodded, and reminded them, "This moment is not about me. It is about a principle. If we demand receipts in politics, we can change the way power works." And change began. Across the country, hashtags evolved into town hall chants. City council members found themselves confronted by activists demanding, "Show us the receipts." Mayors faced scrutiny when budgets didn't match promises. Governors were pressed with documents during press conferences. What had been a viral moment on national TV became a civic ritual. Receipts as evidence, receipts as power, receipts as the antidote to lies. Meanwhile, in Washington, Crockett's colleagues studied her method. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't flailed. She had simply presented facts. It was a masterclass in controlled fire. Senior lawmakers invited her to strategy sessions. They asked how she prepared, how she organized evidence. She explained preparation is protection. They can spin words, but they cannot spin documents. If you anchor in fact, you anchor in truth. The message resonated in a Congress weary of endless partisan noise, but with recognition came resistance. Her critics doubled down, calling her moment performance politics. They accused her of grandstanding. Conservative commentators tried to reframe Melanian's frozen reaction as dignity, as restraint. They argued Crockett ambushed her. But each time they pushed the narrative, the receipts themselves reemerged. Memes juxtaposed her critics' claims with the actual documents Crockett held up. Reality kept overriding spin. The more they tried to smear her, the stronger the truth appeared, and that truth gained momentum. Journalists investigated the receipts, further uncovering layers of misrepresentation not just tied to Melanian's sphere, but across government agencies. Crockett's insistence on documentation opened new storylines. Investigative reports revealed how public funds were misused, how policy claims didn't align with official records, how timelines contradicted official statements. Reporters admitted privately, "We should have been asking for receipts all along." In Dallas, her district pulsed with pride. Local organizers used the moment to reignite voter drives. "If she can hold them accountable, so can we," they told neighbors. Volunteers canvassed harder, reminding people that their ballots were receipts of their own, a paper trail of resistance against suppression. Turnout surged in local elections. Candidates across Texas began echoing Crockett's phrasing. They printed campaign shirts with slogans like, "We've got the receipts." Democracy, so fragile in recent years, felt tangible again, not perfect, but touchable, defensible, yet every rise meets a wall. Republican strategists, wary of her growing influence, sharpened their knives. They returned to redistricting, refining maps, seeking to cut her base apart once more. They viewed her moment not as a defeat, but as a warning. She could not be underestimated. Neutralize her, they whispered in private rooms, but Crockett anticipated it. She had already built alliances, not just in her district, but nationwide. By the time whispers of another map emerged, she had mobilized legal teams, civil rights groups, grassroots coalitions. "We won't be erased in silence," she told them. "We will be loud, we will be prepared, and we will have the receipts." The cultural impact swelled further. Late-night hosts replayed the clip with biting commentary. Documentarians began pitching series on the rise of politicians like Crockett. Authors drafted essays about transparency in the age of disinformation. And in classrooms, students dissected the confrontation as part of case studies on political communication. A single moment had transcended its original setting, embedding itself in the civic imagination. Melanian's role in it all remained a paradox. She did not speak publicly about the freeze, but silence itself became part of the story. Was it shock? Was it strategy? Was it the instinct of someone long trained to keep expression tightly controlled? Analysts debated endlessly. But Crockett never personalized it. She never mocked, never gloated. "This is not about Melanian," she said on one podcast. "This is about the truth. Anyone in her place would have frozen because the truth is heavy." That refusal to make it personal deepened her credibility. She framed the moment as systemic, not individual. The freeze was symbolic of power unprepared for accountability. Back in Washington, hearings intensified. Inspired by her example, other lawmakers began pressing harder for documentation in oversight committees. Requests for emails, budget breakdowns, and internal memos surged. Agencies bristled, but the public mood shifted. Citizens expected transparency. When agencies hesitated, headlines skewered them. The phrase, Where are the receipts? Appeared on protest signs outside federal buildings. A movement had taken root. The opposition did not sit idle. They branded her movement as obstructionist, as anti-institutional. They mocked the receipt craze. But mocking did little to blunt its force, because receipts are not opinions. They are facts. And when facts collide with propaganda, even the loudest noise cannot silence the paper trail. Crockett herself remained measured. She reminded supporters that one viral moment did not solve systemic rot. This is just the start, she told. Our rally, they will keep lying. They will keep spinning. But we must keep demanding. Not just once, not just on live TV, but every single day. She urged citizens to file records requests, to track budgets, to attend council meetings. She was turning a viral spark into a civic fire, and as that fire spread, the political landscape tilted. Candidates in battleground states referenced Crockett in their stump speeches. Some quoted her directly. Others invoked her indirectly. Republican challengers scrambled to adapt, now carrying binders of documents to town halls, knowing someone. And the crowd would inevitably shout, "Show us the receipts." But beyond the theatrics, something deeper was happening. A shift in culture, a recalibration of expectation. Americans, long cynical about politics, rediscovered that truth could cut through. Not perfectly, not instantly, but undeniably. Crockett's confrontation had tapped into an ancient hunger. Proof matters, integrity matters, accountability matters. And the people, not just the politicians, could demand it. Still, the stakes remained perilous. Courts could still redraw her. District power brokers could still retaliate. She knew the path ahead was fraught. Yet she leaned into it, steady, deliberate. I will not run from truth, she declared. I will walk with it, no matter the cost. And people followed because leadership rooted in truth resonates beyond party, beyond spin, beyond fear. The freeze on live TV was just the opening salvo. The war for receipts, the war for accountability was only beginning. The air in Washington grew heavier after that hearing. Because once a line is crossed, once receipts are laid bare, every corridor of power starts to feel vulnerable. Jasmine Crockett knew the silence that followed wasn't calm. It was calculation. In offices behind closed doors, strategists whispered, lawyers plotted, staffers scrubbed memos, and party leaders asked themselves one question. How much longer before the next set of receipts surfaces? Power survives on secrecy, and she had cracked that shield wide open across cable networks. The narrative kept spinning. Some painted her as a challenger, others as a truth teller. Conservative voices scrambled to brand her as reckless, a showman in a chamber meant for decorum. But beneath the shouting, a deeper reality emerged. Viewers at home were not asking if she went too far. They were asking why it had taken this long for someone to go that far. For years, politicians had built fortresses of plausible deniability, speaking in abstractions, weaving language to evade accountability. Crockett stripped away that language, leaving only the evidence. And evidence does not flinch. Back in her district, the ripple effect turned into a wave. Community organizers weren't talking about personalities anymore. They were talking about process. They gathered neighbors and explained how budgets actually move through city halls. They taught high school seniors how to file open records requests. They armed local activists with document templates. The energy that once fizzled after election seasons began to harden into sustained infrastructure. And it wasn't just Dallas, it was Houston, Austin, El Paso. Other states began to mirror the model. In Michigan, activists replayed her words in organizing meetings. In Georgia, voter rights groups branded their campaigns with the same refrain. Bring the receipts, but the higher she rose, the sharper the knives grew. A coalition of Republican lawmakers began whispering in unison, redistrict her out. They had tried it before and they were willing to try again. Meetings in Austin's State House turned tense. Maps were drawn, erased, redrawn. Each new line was an attempt to dilute her base, to scatter the voices that had lifted her. It was more than politics. It was preservation of power. To them, Crockett wasn't just a freshman congresswoman. She was a threat to the structure itself, yet Crockett anticipated it. She had studied history, the Voting Rights Act battles, the legacy of gerrymandering, the cold calculus of district manipulation. She knew redistricting was not about shapes on a map. It was about silencing, so she moved preemptively. Civil rights attorneys, long prepared for this fight, began drafting briefs. Grassroots organizations built war rooms to analyze map proposals in real time. Every new district line was scrutinized, not just for demographics, but for intent. Crockett framed it simply, this is not about one seat. This is about every community's right to representation. If they erase me, they erase you, but we will not be erased quietly. The courts became the new battlefield. Lawsuits flew, arguments sharpened. Lawyers invoked precedents from cases like Shelby County v. Holder, warning that dismantling districts with precision targeted minority communities was nothing less than democracy under siege. Crockett testified not just as a politician, but as a witness for her constituents. Her words carried weight beyond the legal jargon. When you redraw a map to drown voices, you are not rearranging lines, you are rearranging lives. Judges listened, activists filled courtrooms. Reporters scribbled every word. Meanwhile, the cultural undertow continued shifting. Receipts became shorthand for accountability in households far removed from Washington. Workers demanded receipts from employers who broke promises. Parents demanded receipts from school boards mishandling funds. College students demanded receipts from administrators over tuition hikes. What had begun as one confrontation was mutating into a universal language of truth, the establishment noticed. Think tanks churned out papers analyzing the Crockett effect. Political scientists debated whether it was a fad or a fundamental shift. Some argued it was performance politics dressed as reform. Others insisted it was the rebirth of democratic accountability. But one fact remained clear: ignoring her was no longer an option. Melanian's expression froze on camera. Expression froze on camera. Silence continued to haunt the narrative. Pundits dissected her stillness, her frozen expression, as if it were a document itself. Was it disbelief? Shock? Calculation? Theories multiplied, but Crockett never indulged them. Each time reporters asked, she steered the focus back. It's not about her, it's about the truth. If the truth freezes you, ask yourself why. That discipline, that refusal to personalize, fortified her credibility even more. She wasn't chasing clout. She was anchoring herself in principle, yet the principle carried danger. Death threats spiked. Security around her events intensified. Online smear campaigns targeted her relentlessly, spreading fabricated clips, twisting her words. Dark money groups funneled millions into opposition ads. The pressure was suffocating, designed to break her spirit. But Crockett, forged in courtrooms where lives hung on her defense, refused to bend. They can threaten, she told a gathering. But threats are not receipts. Fear is not fact. And I will never surrender truth through intimidation. Her colleagues began to notice something deeper. In committee rooms, when Crockett spoke, staffers leaned forward. She didn't flood the space with noise. She struck surgically, laying out facts with calm precision. Senior members pulled her aside. Keep your fire, but keep your focus. They recognized she wasn't chasing headlines. Headlines were chasing her. She was rebuilding the meaning of congressional testimony itself. Meanwhile, her opponents underestimated the cultural momentum. When they mocked her in press releases, their words were met online with screenshots of receipts debunking them in real time. When they tried to caricature her as unhinged, clips of her measured tone circulated, proving the opposite. The era of unchecked spin was eroding, and she was accelerating the erosion. By mid-year, polling in her district revealed something astonishing, not just rising support for her, but rising trust in the institution she represented. Voters said they felt seen, heard, defended. They didn't just believe in Jasmine Crockett. They believed in their own agency again. And that terrified her adversaries because cynicism had always been their ally. If people believed politics could work, the machinery of suppression lost its grip. As lawsuits over maps dragged through courts, Crockett balanced the grind of legislation with the weight of activism. She visited communities most threatened by redistricting, listening to stories of displacement, of decades-long efforts to build influence suddenly shattered by a pen stroke. She told them, "You are not pawns on a map, you are people. And your voices matter." For many, it was the first time they'd heard a congresswoman speak not in abstractions, but in their language rooted in lived experience, and still, the fight spread outward. National organizations latched on. Voting rights groups amplified her message across states, turning her struggle into a shared struggle. What happened in Texas was not isolated, it was emblematic. In Alabama, North Carolina, Florida, similar battles raged. Crockett's example gave them a rallying cry. Even in the media, the framing began to shift. Reporters who once reduced redistricting to sterile political chess started writing differently. They described families cut apart by district lines, schools divided, communities splintered. They tied maps not to numbers but to human lives. And Crockett's fingerprints were all over that change, but change is fragile. Court victories could be temporary. Political tides could turn. Crockett understood this. She reminded supporters, one viral moment does not save democracy. Sustained vigilance does. Receipts are not one-time weapons, they must be demanded. Daily, she was not building a moment. She was building a culture. And cultures endure longer than headlines dot. As the year wore on, hearings grew sharper, courtroom battles more fierce, and the spotlight heavier. Yet Crockett walked steadily, carrying both the hope of her district and the weight of expectation. She was no longer just Jasmine Crockett from Dallas. She was a symbol, a caution, a reminder that truth still has a place in American politics. The freeze on live television had birthed something bigger than anyone anticipated, a movement where accountability was not optional, where evidence was not buried, and where power trembled because receipts were stronger than spin.